This is Grace Wang at the 2011 KOTESOL International Conference, speaking with Dr. Stephen Krashen, one of the most influential theorists in the field.
What do you mean, one of?
Pardon me, yes. In second language acquisition. Thank you so much.
All right, my pleasure.
Being here with us today, being here with us this weekend. How are you enjoying Korea?
I love it.
I imagine this isn't the first time you've been
It's
to...
the second time I've been to Busan. This is my first time in Seoul, though.
Oh, I see.
So,
okay.
and probably not the last, if any luck at all.
I hope so. Did you have any time to do a little sightseeing around Seoul?
No, not this time, but you have to realize that I have been doing this for 40 years, and I've done a lot of sightseeing. So
Okay.
I'm very conservative about sightseeing now.
Okay.
Okay?
All right. Have you had a chance to taste some of the Korean cuisine?
Well, here's the thing. I've tasted cuisine, and
Yes.
I've had lots of good conversations with my colleagues, which is really the best part.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I understand from the introduction that was given at the start of your plenary that you are doing some work with the underprivileged at the moment.
Yes, the last 3/4 of my career has been an
Yes.
obsession with children of poverty.
I think that's just fantastic.
Well-
Could you tell us a bit about that work?
Sure. Children of poverty is everything in education.
Yes.
The children of middle-class families who go to well-funded schools always do well, no matter what we do. There are some exceptions, some kids who are rebellious and don't pay attention, but they have so many advantages. I look at my own upbringing. I come from a privileged background, middle-class parents who became upper middle class. I come from a family with no family pathology at all, where mother and dad were extremely supportive.
You mean they actually exist?
Oh, they did. they led heroic lives.
Wow.
My older sister, for
Fantastic.
some strange reason, has always been much nicer to me than I have to her, and was expected you would go to college. We had books in the home. I was never hungry. And you know what? It was still hard. School was hard. Graduate school was hard. Everything was hard. And I realized if any of these factors had not been present, I wouldn't have succeeded. And I think it's amazing that children of poverty do as well as they do. Poverty
So
means
much against them.
poverty means it means food problems.
Yes.
It means nutritional problems. It means health problems because children of poverty not only get poor nutrition and live in toxic environments, but they don't have health care. In the United States, the parents can't afford health insurance, or they have very high fees that they have to pay. Children of poverty have practically no access to books. They grow up in homes with very few books because the parents can't afford it.
And I bet
They
the
live
idea
in
of reading books.
No,
isn't-
it's there.
is
No,
there the
Grace,
idea
it
of
is there.
Oh, okay.
Most children of poverty grow up in families where reading is valued,
Oh,
but
very
the
good.
books aren't there.
I see.
The public libraries in poor neighborhoods are inferior. The school libraries
It's not for the want of desire to
no, the desire is there. Absolutely. The school libraries are less well funded, which is tragic. I have estimated, looking at studies of this, my colleagues have done good work on this, that well-off children have thousands of times more access to books than poor children. They live in neighborhoods with more bookstores. Children of poverty in the United States, there are no books anywhere. You can't find them. So how can you do well
the
in
richer
school?
districts are better funded, more
They-
taxes and more money given
They
into
they have
public
every
libraries.
single advantage. The difference is enormous. In the United States, there's a lot of discussion of how bad we're doing in education. The United States, the American test scores are low. It's because we have so many children in poverty. We have 20%, which is higher than every other industrialized country. When you look only at well-off kids, they're at the top of the world. So the problem in education, in all areas, the biggest one is poverty. And we've argued that number one, we need to follow what Martin Luther King said. that if you want to improve education, you first deal with poverty. Most of the problems of education and housing, he said, will disappear if we take care of poverty. And all the studies have backed him up. The U.S. government, I disagree with them profoundly on this issue, thinks that no, we get test scores higher and then poverty will be cured. No, it's absolutely the other way around. Short term, until we can have full employment, we protect children from poverty. That means food programs in school. It means school nurses and libraries. And our research on libraries shows that with a good school library, this is the extrapolation from the research, we think it's true. A good school library means children of poverty will do okay in reading. If we give them access to books, we can at least take care of this one thing of poverty. The tragedy we have worldwide is that the amount of money we're putting into testing, a fraction of this would guarantee every child access to books, better health care, and better food. In other words, we're spending money, very simple,
isn't it?
We're spending the money weighing the animal instead of feeding it. There, aren't you glad you asked?
Okay, well, I think you're absolutely right. I was reading up on some of your recent writings in preparation for this interview, and I really like one of the things you said, 3 things that the children need: food, shelter, and books. Was it?
Food, health care, and books.
Yeah, food, health care, and books.
Very simple, isn't it?
Yeah. Couldn't agree with that more. Anyways, I'm afraid we could just be going on and on, so you'll have to give me the sign.
Well, instead of going on and on, let me tell our listeners and viewers out there how to access this information for free. I not only want to solve world poverty problems, I want to solve your poverty problems. Free stuff. Website. Free stuff. My website is sdkrashen.com. D is for David. There are articles there. Download them. They're all yours. And we have a journal that's now for free, the International Journal of Foreign Language Teaching, ijflt.com. No fee. You are all automatically subscribers. Congratulations. We want the research to be for free. We want it to get out there to as many people as possible.
Okay,
I had a question, if I can interject, related to extensive reading and technology. How much does someone reading their Facebook stream or their Twitter feed or anything relate to?
Well, it's an unanswered question, but I'm optimistic that it's helpful. I've been watching very carefully ebooks, we call the Kindleization of the world, and I think they're fine. My wife has a Kindle. I think it's neat. I've read from it. I can do a little bit of book reading off my iPad now when I'm not playing Angry Birds. So I think there's a bright future. Again, it goes back to poverty. The problem is they're expensive. The Kindles are now anywhere from $80 to $100 US. That's a lot of money. You want to download a book, it's $10 US. That's a lot of money. When the Kindle and the ebooks come down to $5 or less, which they can do, and when the books are like 10 cents, then it's going to help. I'm waiting. I want that day to happen. And when you can share a downloaded book. So I think the future is very bright with electronic reading. So far, the ebooks in the United States are owned only by the wealthy. I've looked at the statistics on them. Very few poor people have them, of course. And they have not really hurt the reading sales of books. They have penetrated the softcover market a little. They've taken it over. But possibly because of ebooks, reading in general, book sales in general are up in the United States. So I think long term it's going to help if they can get the price down.
What about not so much ebooks, but internet language, be it blogs or texting or
Very
updates?
I think it's going to be good. My prediction, if people do research on it, that it's not only good when you read it, but it's going to lead to other reading. And I wrote a paper which is in the journal I mentioned, called "The Case for Free Voluntary Web Surfing." And this is mostly reading through newspapers, etc., reading Facebook and what's on there. On the scraps of evidence we have so far suggest that it's probably good. So I hope researchers keep their eye on this. I'm optimistic about it.
Yeah, that actually leads me to a question about comprehensive input. Free voluntary
Web surfing.
Okay, on the web, there are all kinds of material available: video, audio,
Yeah.
reading. So one question I was wondering about there was types of comprehensive input. Does it matter that how they get that input? Does it have to be
I
through
don't think so.
reading?
I think all these things count. I've been looking at the research on the impact of computers in general. In the previous decades, people were worried about television. In the 1930s, they were worried about movies, and were kids listening to the radio too much? And all the studies come to the same conclusion: not a problem. The more you are involved in the world, even the more SpongeBob you watch and the more Angry Birds you play, who knows what kind of an effect. If it's interesting and fascinating, something's going on. The research on television is most instructive. It shows that, and this was done in the 70s and 80s when people were really worried about this, but I think we'll find the same thing. From a little bit of television is beneficial, better than no television at all. From 0 to 30 minutes a day, school performance improves if you watch more. Then it starts getting negative, but it's not really visible unless it's excessive. You got to do it 4 hours a day or more before it starts to negatively impact. My conclusion is it's not television, it's what's on television. What are you watching, etc.
Well, one problem we have in Korea, all the English-speaking television shows have Korean subtitles under them.
Yeah,
And they end up reading the subtitles instead.
that's because
So-
the language is too hard.
Yes.
If I ran the zoo, if I were running the show, I would have a channel for easy English, where it's like sheltered English, where there's good programs, and the English is slowed down, made a little more comprehensible, then people won't need the subtitles as long as the shows are good.
Actually, I think there was a study in Europe done where they actually put English subtitles instead.
And they find a
they
slight
found-
positive effect. I've seen those studies.
Would you say that
They're-
that's a good idea?
It's okay. You're not going to get that much language from a couple of movies with a few subtitles. And I have nothing against it. It's fine. I think the real payoff is when we have, say, an episode of Glee with easier English, where the script is actually easier English, made comprehensible, where the speech is slowed down a little bit, where there's a little less idiomatic use. And then you're going to see progress.
But then there's the enjoyment factor.
Yeah,
How
it's
do
gotta
you-
be fun.
Yeah, how do you make that enjoyable
That's-
for adult learners? For children, it's pretty easy to script simple language in a way that's engaging. But
Well, I've been working on this. My colleague of mine and I are trying to work on books, storybooks written in Mandarin that are interesting for adult beginners and really interesting. I'll tell you the plot of the first one.
oh,
Okay?
Okay.
We're just working on it now. And you've got to make it exciting. That's hard. A young lady comes from Korea to Beijing. She only speaks Korean. She wants to learn Mandarin. A young man comes from the United States to Beijing. He only speaks English. They see each other at the airport. She looks at him and says, "Whoa." He looks at her and says, "Yes." They go to Chinese class. They're in the same class. She looks at him. All right. He looks at her. Then the teacher asks their names. That's the first lesson in every class. What's your name? What's your name? He does it. She comes to the girl, and the girl doesn't answer. She's too busy looking at the boy. And the story is how they finally meet, how they learn enough Mandarin to be able to communicate with each other and have their first date. So you see, we're struggling to make it interesting and comprehensible. You have asked the biggest, most important question in language pedagogy. How do you make input comprehensible and highly interesting at the same time? That's the job of language teaching. That's what we're all struggling to do.
And there's a related question in the chat room about it being hard to find compelling readers for
Yes.
students.
Yes,
What's
and that's
a
what we're
teacher
trying to
do
do. Well,
other than get your upcoming product?
I think that this is happening. When I look at what's going on with graded readers, they're getting better all the time. And now some people are trying to use the creativity of the students, where students are writing these things. Okay, my colleague Ken Smith is working on this in southern Taiwan, in Kaohsiung, where you're actually seeing what the kids come up with. So I think this is what we're all struggling to do. How do you do it? Slowly, we're making our way. It's the right question. This is the where the research effort should go. How do you get beginning readers that are truly compelling? We'll keep trying.
I have a question about the role of the teacher, and you started touching on that. So you say the role of the teacher should be to make input comprehensible in an engaging and enjoyable way. And so that being said, direct instruction, not good, not even for advanced students.
I've recommended for direct instruction, which means telling people about grammar, basically.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, that's
maybe
direct
we should start there.
instruction.
The definition of
You give me yours, then I can answer the question.
Well, direct instruction, from what I understand, would be instruction that is rule-based, talking about the rules of the language.
Okay. This is how you make a relative clause.
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
Deductively or inductively, you come down to the rules of the system and you try to make that system known.
Okay, for adults, it is peripheral and optional.
Yes.
It has some help here and there, never necessary. One thing it does is it's a way of satisfying curiosity about language. We call this linguistics. And a small percentage of the human race thinks this is interesting. Not very many people do. I think it should be optional. It can be done at the beginning of the English program in the native language, or it can be done later in English as sheltered as content-based instruction. The other part is grammar as a use as a monitor to edit when you write,
Yes.
okay? And sometimes make things comprehensible. And for this, I've borrowed from a very successful language teaching method in the United States called TPRS. And this is Blaine Ray's idea. He's invented something called pop-up grammar, which I think is really clever. In the course of the lesson, when it's an interesting grammatical principle, the teacher might stop and say, by the way, this is a whatever. Like the example I like in a Spanish class I took, the teacher, Jason Fritz, stopped and said, this little O at the end of the verb means past tense. Now, it was 3 seconds. Those who liked grammar paid attention. Those who didn't ignored it, and nothing was wasted. It was good for language appreciation for the junior linguists in the class who think this is interesting. And some people might actually use it to monitor their writing. So I think that's a quick way, no harm done.
One question I have, though, even among native speakers, when by the time they reach college, we all seem to need a certain degree of grammar tuition in order to be able to write at the college level. I
Okay.
can't imagine ever having learned to write at college without any grammar instruction.
99.999% of our ability to write academic prose comes from reading. Most of academic prose has not even been described. So there's no way you can learn that by rules.
I see.
Like this is how paragraphs are constructed. You can only do the crudest approximations.
Okay.
Where grammar does help a little are places where your version of the language is slightly different from the standard. And many native speakers, I'm included, have tiny little gaps here and there. For example, I have not acquired the distinction between its and its, with the one with the apostrophe mark and one without. And I forget it every 3 years. I have to look it up or think of the rule. That's a good place for grammar, and I'm glad I know the rule because I want to make sure things are perfect. There are a couple of spelling rules that help here and there, but these are a tiny, tiny fraction of the language. We think they're very important because it's so salient. We think this is a large part of our competence, but it isn't. If you were to think hard about all the grammar rules that you actually use, you'd find maybe there's 5 or 10 that are actually useful to you, and I think that's fine. That's called teaching editing. And it's a good thing to know. Again, it's part of language arts, but it's a peripheral, small part.
Yeah.
It's not the main thing.
One thing I do find helpful when I'm teaching my university students, though, is when they've written a draft and they go back to revise it. If they do know a certain amount of grammar, they can look at their work and revise
A little bit
it.
here and there.
Would that be the
Just
kind of...
exactly,
yeah.
just a few, and that's
Yeah.
it's really not revision, it's editing.
Yeah,
Revision is when you get better ideas,
right.
which is how we get smarter.
True.
So yeah, you're supporting what I say. And if you were, I'll suggest a research project. Ask your students as they do that to mark down the rules that they're using. you might come up with a whole class of maybe 20 rules, and they're all pretty straightforward. That's fine. And those are the useful ones.
I have a little related project going. I've written a series of grammar books that teach grammar in a non-conventional manner, and they have to read these books. And during revision stage, I ask them to go back to a book that they have read. These are books, grammar books that they don't work through per se, but they actually just have to read it. It's reading and doing grammar work at the same time. Anyway, I don't want to spend too much time talking about that. But the point is, when they're revising, I ask them, okay, so have a look, and which part of the book can you think back to that will help you to improve your writing?
Are we talking about revision or editing?
We're talking about, actually revision and editing, because grammar in the service of making ideas clearer. For example, the use of complex clauses to make connections between ideas more salient.
I have found that if you haven't done an enormous amount of reading, that's extremely hard to do. And those who've read a lot, when you tell them about complex sentences, you're really giving them learning where they already have acquisition.
Yes.
You're showing them to appreciate what they've already acquired.
Yes,
There's
absolutely.
no other way of getting it than massive reading.
I think too that when they learn the rules of the system, it's really about reinforcing what they've
For some
already
of them.
taken in
For
intuitively.
that tiny percentage who think grammar is satisfying. And I'm one of them. I have a PhD in linguistics. I studied all of Chomsky, all the grammar rules, and I think it's just the most interesting thing in the world. And it has taken me years to recover from this. Through years of meditation.
I can only imagine.
I'm a recovering linguist.
Right.
For most of the human race, grammar is not a big part of their lives. I go with Richard Wright, who said that, he wanted to learn to write. He said he went through grammars and found them dull. He said, I learned far more about writing by reading novels. That's where you get the style.
If I can ask maybe one, I don't know how much time we have left, but there is one question I need to ask, and that is about what you mentioned in passing regarding reading at the academic level, that we learn to write academic by reading academic texts.
You bet.
Problem is free voluntary reading. How do we get university, college level students to do academic reading free and voluntarily?
Okay, let me give you two
is
answers to
where-
that. Let me give
yeah.
you 2 answers to that. First of all, free voluntary reading will not give you academic language.
Okay, thank you.
It can't.
Okay.
But it brings you to the threshold where academic writing is comprehensible.
Right. So.
I predict if you look at the career of people who've mastered academic writing, you'll see this middle stage of massive, wide, phenomenal amounts of free voluntary reading for pleasure. You take someone who goes to college who has to read academic texts, the ones who've done free reading, who've read Harry Potter and Twilight and tons of it, will find the textbooks much more comprehensible. The discourse styles are not the same, but they overlap enormously. And very often people do free reading in the area they're going to specialize in. Like you find someone who always wanted to be a lawyer is going to read John Grisham novels, which gives you a huge amount of the technical vocabulary. Okay, I wanted to be a scientist. I read science fiction. That made me excited about science. I read a lot of it, and that was a great deal of the terminology. So this brings you to the threshold. Then you do an enormous amount of academic reading, which if you're a retired professor, it's voluntary. And I still do a lot of it.
So the upshot of this, and perhaps I'll conclude with this, maybe a question or statement, I'm not sure. Korea, a very, very strong reading culture here, a very, very strong academic culture here. The upshot for Korea and English education in Korea would be to read in English more, academically and free
Let's
voluntary.
add the missing link. Wide, relaxed, free voluntary reading as a middle stage,
Okay.
which will make the academic reading so much easier.
Okay. In English, reading in English.
In English,
remember.
and of course in Korean as
Yeah.
well. The more you do of one, the more you do the other. We've done studies to show this.
Well, thank you so much. This has been a very enlightening
Oh gosh, thank you.
discussion. Thank
I found
you.
it fascinating. It's all about my work, of course. Thank you.